In today's lecture, we'll be taking a look at the topic elasticity. On to slide 2, which is the objectives slide. What are the objectives of today's lecture? We'll be taking a look at what is price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, cross elasticity of demand, and we'll also be looking at the determinants of demand and supply elasticity. We'll be mathematically explaining the concept of price elasticity of demand, income elasticity of demand, and cross elasticity of demand. We'll illustrate the various types of elasticities using examples, and we'll also calculate we'll also use these examples to calculate the different types of elasticities. Now we are moving on to the third slide, which examines or defines elasticity. So when we hear the term elasticity or elastic, what do we think about? Response. If it is you were to pull an elastic band, it will respond immediately. So the term elasticity refers to the responsiveness of one variable to the change in another variable. How does one variable respond when there's a change in another variable? So for example, how does quantity demanded respond when there's a change in price? Now this concept is important in understanding how the market works, because the more elastic variables are, the more responsive they are to a change in another variable. So if it is one variable change, what is the response of the other variable to the change in that variable? So elasticity measures responsiveness. Now in slide 4, we are going to move on to examine the different types of elasticities. And the first type that we are going to look at today is price elasticity of demand. What is price elasticity of demand? Well, price elasticity of demand measures the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. How does quantity demanded respond when prices change? Right? Remember, we said elasticity measures the responsiveness of one variable to a change in another variable. So for price elasticity of demand, it measures the responsiveness of demand to a change in price. Now, what is the formula? Percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. So we calculate price elasticity of demand, PED, as the percentage change in quantity demanded over the percentage change in price. Now, how do we measure percentage change? So if I wanted to calculate the percentage change in quantity demanded, this would be the new quantity minus the old quantity all over the old quantity multiplied by 100. So percentage change again is new quantity minus old quantity over the old quantity multiplied by 100. In the same way, if I wanted to calculate percentage change in price, it would be the new price minus the old price all over the old price multiplied by 100. So the formula for price elasticity of demand is percentage change in quantity demanded over percentage change in price. Now, you will notice that the elasticity coefficient for the price elasticity of demand, it's always going to be negative. So when you calculate the price elasticity of demand, the answer or the elasticity coefficient is always going to be negative. And this is because of the fact that there's a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded. Remember, based on the demand curve, it's downward sloping. When prices go up, quantity demanded falls. And when prices increase, quantity demanded would decrease. So your elasticity coefficient is always negative. Now in the next slide, slide 5, we are going to look at an example. So for example, if there's a 30% increase in the price of oil, which caused quantity demanded to fall by 20%, then the price elasticity of demand would be 0.15. How do we know that? Because we apply the formula. Percentage change in quantity demanded, the change in quantity demanded was 20%, a fall by 20%, so that's minus 20%, over the percentage change in price. What was the percentage change in price? 30% increase. So minus 20 over 30 gives us minus 0.15. Another example is that if there's a 10% fall in the price of tomatoes, caused a 25% increase in the quantity demanded, then price elasticity of demand would be minus 2.5. How do we know that? Percentage change in quantity is 25%, percentage change in price is minus 10%, and it's minus 10% because there's a fall in price, and that gives us minus 2.5. Now, when it is we arrive at the answer, or when it is we arrive at the elasticity coefficient, how do we interpret this answer? We are now going to move on to examine how do we interpret the elasticity coefficient when calculated. Now on to slide 6, just a reminder that because the demand curve is negatively sloped and price and quantity demanded work in the opposite direction, then we are either dividing a negative by a positive or a positive by a negative. Therefore, the price elasticity of demand is always negative. However, for interpretation purposes, we will take the positive value to interpret. Now we're moving on to slide 7 to see what do we mean or how do we interpret the answer or the elasticity coefficient. Now in slide 7 we will see that when it is our elasticity coefficient is greater than 1. So when we calculate price elasticity of demand, if the answer is greater than 1, then demand is said to be elastic. If the answer is less than 1, demand is said to be inelastic. If it's equal to 1, unit elasticity. If it's equal to 0, perfectly inelastic. If it's equal to infinity, perfectly elastic. Now, what do we mean when we say demand is elastic or inelastic or unit elasticity or perfectly inelastic or perfectly elastic? We are going to move on to slide 8 to see what do we mean when we say the price elasticity of demand is elastic. So if it is you were to calculate price elasticity of demand, and from your calculation, your answer, which is your elasticity coefficient, is greater than 1. This would mean that price elasticity of demand is elastic. Demand is elastic. What do we mean when we say demand is elastic? It means that a change in price is going to bring about a larger proportionate change in quantity demanded. So for example, if we have a 10% change in price, it will bring about a 20, 30, 40% change in quantity demanded. So whenever there's a price change and it brings about a greater percentage change in quantity demanded, demand is said to be elastic. So when you calculate the price elasticity of demand, your answer is going to be greater than 1. The elasticity coefficient is going to be greater than 1. So as long as your elasticity coefficient is greater than 1, it means that demand is elastic. Elastic there means that a change in price will bring about a greater change in quantity demanded. Now, when demand is elastic, it's going to have a positive effect on revenue. A fall in price would cause a large increase in quantity demanded and therefore an increase in total revenue. So we know that when elasticity is greater than 1, it is elastic. Elastic there means that a change in price brings about a greater change in quantity demanded. Now on to slide 9. What do we mean when we say demand is inelastic? So if when you calculate price elasticity of demand, your answer is less than 1, it means that demand is inelastic. What do we mean when we say inelastic? This means that an increase in price would cause a smaller change in quantity demanded. So if there's a 10% increase in price, it's going to lead to a 5% change in quantity demanded. So the change in price is going to be greater than the change in quantity demanded. Or the change in price is going to lead to a smaller proportionate change in quantity demanded. So whenever your elasticity coefficient is less than 1, demand is said to be inelastic. Inelastic there means a change in price is going to lead to a smaller proportionate change in quantity demanded. Right? And this will have a negative effect on the revenue because when demand is inelastic, a fall in price would cause an increase in demand, but total revenue would fall because of the change or the fall in prices. So far we're seeing when elasticity is greater than 1, it's elastic. If your elasticity coefficient is less than 1, then it is said to be inelastic. We are now moving on to slide 10, where we will see in slide 10 that when your elasticity coefficient is equal to 1, so when elasticity is equal to 1, so if when you calculate price elasticity of demand, it is equal to 1, then this means you have unit elasticity. This basically means that a change in price would lead to the exact change in quantity demanded. So a change in price leads to the exact proportionate change in quantity demanded. So if we have a 20% change in price, it's going to lead to a 20% change in quantity demanded. And this basically has no effect on total revenue. Total revenue would remain the same, as the percentage change in price is the exact percentage change in quantity demanded. So if your elasticity coefficient is greater than 1, it's elastic. If it's less than 1, it's inelastic. If it's equal to 1, it's unit elasticity. Now on to slide 11. When we say elasticity is totally inelastic, this is where your elasticity coefficient or your answer is equal to 0. So when demand is inelastic, this means an increase in price would cause so for totally inelastic, just a minute, totally inelastic, this is not, no matter what happens to price, your quantity demanded remains the same. So your answer, your elasticity coefficient would be 0. It means that a change in price has no effect on quantity demanded. So prices can increase or decrease and quantity demanded would remain the same. This is usually illustrated by a vertical line. And the more prices rise, the greater the level of expenditure or revenue, right? So totally inelastic, this is where a change in price has no effect on quantity demanded. So when you calculate your price elasticity of demand, if your answer or the elasticity coefficient is equal to 0, then demand is said to be totally inelastic. Now on to slide 12, the opposite of that is where demand is said to be indefinitely elastic or perfectly elastic. And this is where your elasticity coefficient is equal to infinity or your answer is equal to infinity. And this is illustrated by a horizontal line, which means that price is fixed, quantity demanded can increase or decrease. And there's no change on price. Price remains the same, right? So far, what have we seen? When it is you calculate your price elasticity of demand, if your answer is greater than 1, then demand is said to be elastic. If your answer is less than 1, demand is said to be inelastic. If your answer is equal to 1, demand is said to be unit elasticity. If your answer is equal to 0, then it's said to be perfectly inelastic. If your answer is equal to infinity, then it is perfectly elastic.